Sterile Millionaire cries after discovering that the poor cleaner he saved gave him twins. Leonard Sanders gazed out over the city from the window of his office on the top floor of the skyscraper bearing his company's name. The reflection of the city's lights shimmered in the glass, creating a mosaic of sparks that contrasted with the darkness within him. He was a man at the peak of success, owner of a conglomerate that spanned from real estate to technology, admired and feared in equal measure. He wore a pristine, deep blue, custom-tailored suit paired with gold cufflinks that gleamed under the light of the lamps. Every detail of his appearance radiated power and control. However, this image was merely a facade. At 45, Leonard felt the weight of a life defined by sacrifices and loneliness. He had reached the summit, but at a cost that now revealed itself in the stillness of the nights. Infertility, a secret shared only with his doctor and a few confidants. Failed treatments, shattered expectations, and disappointment intertwined in his mind like sharp memories. The opulence of his mansion, a testament to his success, was an empty space that reminded him of what he had never achieved, filling his home with life and laughter. The echo of his footsteps resonated as he walked through the vast marble hall, surrounded by contemporary art and designer furniture. Every painting, every sculpture, was a meticulously chosen acquisition meant to impress partners and visitors, but they evoked no emotion in him. The cold glow of luxury could not warm the loneliness that enveloped him. For years, he had convinced himself that family was an unnecessary luxury, something for which he had neither time nor patience. But the truth, the one he even denied admitting to himself, was that his success felt incomplete without someone to share it with. John Ortega, his lifelong business partner, was a disturbing contrast. They had started their careers together, but the paths each had taken had led them to become distorted reflections of each other. While Leonard built and protected what he had created through hard work, John always sought ways to take advantage, using others' weaknesses for his own gain. He was a calculating man with a sharp smile and a gaze that could pierce any defense. John had learned to read Leonard like an open book, and although they maintained the appearance of loyalty, both knew that the underlying tension between them was a ticking time bomb. That night, Leonard mentally reviewed the details of an important transaction, one that would ensure his company's expansion overseas. The office was dimly lit, illuminated only by the faint glow of his computer screen and the radiance of the city beyond the windows. His assistant had reminded him of his schedule for the following day: meetings, conferences, and a charity event he had to attend out of obligation. The routine that had once given him purpose now left him feeling empty. Suddenly, a faint sound, the distant echo of a laugh, caught his attention. It came from one of the lower floors where the cleaning staff had begun their shift. Leonard paused his thoughts and allowed himself a moment of curiosity. It was a human sound, vibrant, contrasting with the coldness of his surroundings. He approached his office door and peered through the crack. A young woman in a modest uniform was cleaning one of the large windows, humming a cheerful tune. Her expression was tired, but there was a spark of life in her eyes that left him puzzled. Leonard stepped back, feeling an unease he couldn't explain. Years of loneliness and seeing only calculated smiles had hardened him, but something in that scene touched a forgotten corner of his being. He returned to his desk and took a sip of whiskey. The bitterness of the liquor couldn't calm the restlessness that overtook him. The echo of that laugh reminded him that beyond success and possessions, there existed a world where life was simple and small moments mattered. As the night wore on, John's silhouette flashed across the screen of his phone, lit by notifications of emails and messages. To John, that laugh that had bewildered Leonard meant nothing more than background noise. But Leonard, unknowingly, had just heard the first note of a symphony that would change his life. One that, when it reached its climax, would present challenges and dilemmas he could never have imagined, even in his worst nightmares. The dawn arrived in the city, bringing the promise of a new day, but for Jenna Brown, the start of each day was a constant struggle. She lived in a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, where the thin walls and sounds of urban life intertwined with her thoughts. At 26, Jenna had faced more hardships than most would in a lifetime. The death of her father in a work accident had been the turning point that changed everything, leaving her with the responsibility of caring for her younger brother, Oliver. Oliver, barely 10 years old, was the light that brightened Jenna's darkest days. Despite the many difficulties, the spark in Oliver's eyes and the passion with which he played his old flute were enough to keep her going. Watching him practice in the small corner of their apartment, where sunlight filtered through the worn curtains, was a constant reminder of why she pushed herself so hard. Every morning, Jenna dressed in her worn blue uniform and headed to the Sanders Company building, a skyscraper that loomed as a symbol of opulence in the city. The entrance to the lobby, decorated with marble and glass, always gave her a chill, a stark contrast to the humbleness of her life. But she had no time to dwell on these differences. Her job as a cleaner demanded all her attention and energy. On her way to work, she often stopped at a small second-hand music store. There, in the window, a new flute caught Oliver's eye every time they passed by. The instrument was too expensive for her budget, but the desire to one day give it to him fueled Jenna's determination. As she swept and mopped the offices of the high-ranking executives, she dreamed of the day when Oliver could study at a real music school and have a better future. Jenna's friendship with Anna Miller, an employee in the accounting department, was her greatest comfort at the company. Anna, a woman in her early 30s with a sharp wit and keen intelligence, always made Jenna smile with her sarcastic comments about the company's upper echelons. They shared moments of complicity during breaks, when Anna would tell her stories about how to survive in a world dominated by powerful, unscrupulous men. "Did you know John Ortega has been in Leonard's office for 3 weeks, acting like it's his own house?" Anna whispered one day, glancing down the hall toward the partners' offices. "They say he's setting things up for something big," Jenna replied indifferently as she mechanically wiped the windows. The lives of the millionaires were so far removed from hers that corporate intrigues felt like stories from another world. But the truth was that those stories could affect the stability of the entire staff, including her. Anna, aware of this, kept a close eye on John's movements, looking for any signs of wrongdoing. No one at the company suspected that Anna had personal reasons for doing so. Her brother Matteo had disappeared years ago after trying to expose corrupt practices at one of John's former companies. Jenna, for her part, focused all her energy on keeping Oliver safe and fed. The nights when he practiced his flute and the sound filled their tiny apartment were her moments of peace. Sometimes she closed her eyes and let the notes transport her to a world where there were no unpaid bills, exhausting schedules, or uncertainty about the future. One Tuesday afternoon, after a long, tiring day at work, Jenna came home to find Oliver practicing a new melody he had learned from a video online. His concentration and the dedication he put into each note made her smile. She knew that behind that music lay bigger dreams than the small space they lived in. "You're doing great, Oliver," Jenna said, hugging him from behind. "Do you think I'll ever get to play on a big stage?" he asked, a sparkle in his eyes that left no room for doubt. "Of course. Just keep practicing and never stop dreaming," she replied, with a lump in her throat. Jenna knew the days ahead would not be easy. The looks and whispers she sometimes heard in the company's hallways told her that something big was about to happen. And while she tried to stay away from the problems and focus on her work, life had other plans, and soon she would discover that her struggle to protect Oliver and his dreams would unexpectedly intertwine with the fates of the city's powerful figures. The reflection of the moon on her window's glass was the last thing she saw before closing her eyes that night, as Oliver's flute sound filled the air, enveloping them both in a bubble of hope and love. But beyond those four walls, a storm was beginning to form. A storm that would test not only her resilience, but also her faith in others and in herself. It was a calm night at the towering Sanders Company building. The office lights had been turned off, and only the shadows of the cleaning staff moved silently between desks and empty hallways. Jenna Brown was finishing her shift on the top floor, cleaning the windows of one of the conference rooms. Though exhausted, her mind stayed occupied thinking about Oliver and the upcoming music school audition. Anxiety and hope mixed in her chest, urging her to keep going despite the challenges. As she leaned to reach a distant corner of the window, a faint red flash blinked in the glass reflection. At first, she thought it was the reflection of an office device, but soon she noticed a sharp odor beginning to fill the air. She turned her head and saw a thin line of black smoke rising from the hallway that connected to Leonard Sanders's office. Deafening alarm blasts through the building, shaking the foundations with a metallic roar. Emergency lights flickered, bathing the hallways in intermittent red light. The fire, which had started in a small file room, spread quickly, fueling the chaos. Employees still remaining on the lower floors rushed to evacuate, their cries of confusion and fear echoing in the stairwells. Jenna felt a knot of panic tighten in her throat as she watched the flames begin to lick the hallway walls. She was about to run toward the exit when one thought stopped her dead in her tracks. Leonard's office. She knew he often stayed late working on important transactions. Without a second thought, she dropped the rag she was holding and ran in the opposite direction of the crowd. The heat grew with every step she took. Jenna felt her back drenched in sweat, her hands shaking, but she pushed the door to Leonard's office open with all her strength. Upon entering, she saw him hunched over his desk, unaware of the emergency, immersed in the papers of a crucial transaction. The smoke was starting to fill the room, and the flames crackled near the door. "Mr. Sanders!" she yelled, her voice breaking with adrenaline and smoke. Leonard looked up, his eyes reflecting surprise and confusion at seeing the young woman in the doorway. The scene froze for an eternal second. Leonard blinked, trying to process what was happening, and in that instant, he felt the burn of reality. The air was becoming suffocating, and the fire was advancing quickly. Jenna moved toward him, grabbing his arm and pulling him with a strength she didn't know she had. Leonard, still dazed, allowed himself to be dragged out as the flames spread to the curtains and furniture. When they finally made it into the hallway, where the air was slightly fresher, Jenna released Leonard and staggered back, panting. Their eyes met, his still marked with astonishment, and hers filled with fear, reflecting every ounce of the tension they had just experienced. That moment, where the roles had reversed and the untouchable magnate was saved by the young cleaner, marked a shift in both of their perceptions. The blare of fire truck sirens filled the air, along with the blue and red lights flashing through the windows. Leonard, still trying to regain his composure, watched Jenna with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something he couldn't name. As chaos unfolded around them and the firefighters worked to contain the flames, he couldn't take his eyes off the young woman who had saved him, her uniform stained with soot and her eyes full of a courage that defied the circumstances. A few meters away, John Ortega watched the scene from the safety of his car parked on the corner. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes revealed a spark of interest. A calculating thought formed in his mind as he watched Leonard, breathing heavily, staring at Jenna with an intensity he had never seen before. The flames were dying down in the building, but in that instant, a new, invisible and potentially dangerous fire had begun to burn in Leonard's heart and in John's plans. The fire was extinguished that night, but it had sparked something no one could foresee. A spark that, from that moment on, would intertwine the fates of Leonard and Jenna in a way that would defy expectations, hierarchies, and the secrets each of them held. The city's dawn arrived with the promise of normalcy that seemed impossible after the chaos of the previous night. The fire at the Sanders Tower had left its mark, and the scent of burnt wood still lingered in the air when employees began returning to the building, curious and expectant about the stories already circulating. However, for Jenna Brown, the day was a whirlwind of emotions struggling to surface. She had barely slept after the traumatic experience of rescuing Leonard. Her hands still trembled, and although she tried to maintain composure, she knew something within her had changed. Leonard Sanders, for his part, gazed out at the city from his office, whose main window was now covered with a makeshift tarp. The broken glass and charred furniture were the witnesses to the disaster that had almost consumed him. However, what troubled him most wasn't the material losses, but the memory of Jenna's eyes when she burst into his office, calling his name and pulling him to safety. There was something in that look, a mix of courage and determination that left him stunned. For the first time in years, Leonard felt a genuine curiosity that broke the monotony of his controlled life. The day went on, and Jenna tried to return to routine, though the curious stares and whispers as she passed made her feel exposed. Anna, seeing her in the break room, intercepted her with a sarcastic smile and crossed arms. "You're quite the heroine, you know," Anna said, lowering her voice so no one else would hear. "There are rumors that you saved the big boss last night." Jenna sighed and looked at the floor, nervous. She didn't want the story to become a spectacle or draw unnecessary attention. Her only intention had been to act on instinct, without thinking of the consequences. "I don't want any trouble, Anna. I just did what anyone would have done," she replied, her voice trembling, betraying her unease. "Well, anyone didn't do it. Only you. And it seems he noticed," Anna said, casting a meaningful glance. Later that day, the news spread like wildfire. Leonard Sanders, in a gesture that left everyone stunned, personally requested that a recognition bonus be awarded to Jenna Brown for her bravery. Not only that, but he also proposed a new position for her, one that would take her away from the cleaning duties and place her in a more stable position within the company. When Jenna was called to the Human Resources office, her heart raced, and a mix of excitement and anxiety took over her. "Thank you, but I can't accept the money," Jenna said to the HR manager, surprising everyone in the room. The silence that followed was broken by an uncomfortable cough. "Are you sure? It's a considerable sum, and Mr. Sanders insisted you accept it," the manager said, raising an eyebrow. "I appreciate it, really, but I'd prefer to keep earning what I deserve for my work," Jenna replied, her voice shaky but firm. She knew accepting help from a man like Leonard could mean an unwanted commitment, and she didn't want to depend on anyone, least of all someone so powerful. Jenna's response reached Leonard's ears. The admiration he already felt for her grew upon hearing of her rejection of the bonus. The young woman's decision revealed an integrity he rarely found in his world, filled with ambitions and power games. He leaned back in his leather chair and stared at his computer screen, where the photo of the incident in the building had been captured by the media. In one corner, almost invisible, Jenna's figure stood out, her uniform singed, her hands stained with soot. Leonard took a sip of coffee, his gaze lost in thoughts that led him into uncharted territory. Since the night of the fire, the emptiness that had always accompanied him had started to fade, replaced by a restlessness that, though uncomfortable, felt different. For the first time in a long time, he wanted to know someone beyond their name and role. He wanted to understand what had driven Jenna to risk her life for him without expecting anything in return. In the office, the atmosphere was thick with rumors. The furtive glances and knowing smiles followed Jenna wherever she went. While some admiration was sincere, the attention wasn't entirely welcome. Jenna, aware that the stares and prying questions could complicate her position, felt a knot in her stomach every time she encountered a malicious grin. In a corner of the building, John Ortega watched it all with the same interest as a strategist on the battlefield. Leonard had shown something John considered a weakness, an unusual compassion for an employee. And if there was one thing he had learned over the years with Leonard, it was that even the strongest fortresses could be torn down with the right blow. The atmosphere in the Sanders Tower, after the fire incident, had become charged with palpable tension. Stories of Jenna Brown's brave actions had spread throughout the building, turning her into an unexpected figure of admiration and curiosity. However, where some saw a heroine, John Ortega saw an opportunity. Always lurking, He had been observing Leonard with a critical, calculating eye for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move and destabilize him. John was a middle-aged man, with the bearing of a shrewd businessman and the smile of a predator. His perfectly tailored suit and precise movements made him stand out among the company's partners. But what truly defined his character was his boundless ambition. He had stood by Leonard's side since the company's early days, watching as his friend became the face of an empire that John had helped build. However, envy and dissatisfaction had settled in his heart, turning him ruthless in his intentions. The day after Leonard's gesture towards Jenna became public, John decided it was time to act. He entered Leonard's office without warning, something only he dared to do, and found him reviewing a report. Leonard looked up with a neutral expression, accustomed to his partner's interruptions. "I see you've been making unexpected moves lately," John said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "A bonus for a cleaning employee. Not very typical of you, Leonard." Leonard kept his gaze fixed on John, carefully considering each word he was about to speak. "She earned it. She risked her life in the fire." "It's the least I could do," Leonard replied in a controlled tone, returning his attention to the report as if the conversation was already over. But John wasn't one to back down easily. "That's what everyone says, but I wonder, is there something more behind that gesture?" John hinted, letting the question hang in the air. Leonard felt a slight shiver down his spine, but he didn't let John see it. "If you have something to say it clearly, John," Leonard responded, his voice now colder. John smiled and leaned toward him, resting his hands on the edge of the desk. "I'm just saying that perceptions matter. The partners, the board, the media. Not everyone sees compassion as a virtue. Some see it as a weakness," he said, straightening up and adjusting his cufflinks before turning to leave the office without waiting for a response. Leonard watched him go, feeling a pressure in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. John knew how to play on others' insecurities, and this time was no exception. But what John didn't understand was that this time, Leonard wasn't going to be intimidated so easily. Meanwhile, Jenna tried to return to normalcy in her new position, an administrative assistant role that, although less exhausting, made her feel exposed. The glances and comments behind her back had become more frequent, and the feeling of being at the center of a whirlwind of rumors made her nervous. Her friend Anna, who closely followed the events and maintained her role as a protector, couldn't help but notice the way John looked at Jenna. One afternoon, during a brief break in the break room, Anna approached Jenna with a serious expression. "Have you noticed how John watches you?" Anna asked, her voice low and cautious. Jenna stopped stirring her coffee and looked at her, confused. "John? No. I don't pay attention to those things, Anna. I have enough to worry about," she replied, trying to downplay it. "Well, maybe you should start paying attention. That man is dangerous, Jenna. He always has a hidden agenda," Anna warned, placing her hand on Jenna's arm, offering a comforting warmth that contrasted with the chill that had just settled over her. That night, as Jenna headed home, her thoughts swirled around Anna's words and John's unsettling gaze. Although she tried to focus on Oliver and how she could improve their situation, a sense of imminent danger clung to her. John, for his part, was carefully planning his next moves. He had discovered a weakness in Leonard, the attention he gave to an employee, and he knew that, if he played his cards right, he could turn that weakness into a fatal blow. John's ambition, like a shadow, loomed over them, ready to expose, manipulate, and strike. The silence of the night didn't announce the storm that was about to come. In the distance, the city lights flickered, unaware of the intrigues and dangers brewing in the heights of the Sanders Tower. The sun rose between the city's buildings, casting long shadows that stretched across the streets. In Jenna's apartment, the morning began with the melody of Oliver practicing on his old flute, a sound that filled the space with fragile but powerful hope. The audition for the prestigious music school was only a few days away, and both Jenna and Oliver knew how important this opportunity was. For him, It would be his entrance into a world where his talent could flourish. For her, the promise of a brighter future for her brother, a reason to fight and keep going. Oliver, his eyes full of excitement, looked at Jenna as he played the notes with dedication. "Do you think I'll do well, Sophie?" he asked, letting the nervousness seep into his words. Jenna, kneeling beside him, smiled and ruffled his hair affectionately. "You won't just do well, Oliver. You'll do amazing. You have a talent no one can ignore," she replied, though inside she struggled with the fear that everything could be derailed by circumstances. That day, Jenna arrived at the office earlier than usual. Her new role as an administrative assistant required attention and precision, and although the change had been a relief compared to the long hours of cleaning, the pressure and the curious stares of others made her feel out of place. But today, her mind was on Oliver, his audition, and how every day of effort would be worth it if he secured the scholarship. On the top floor, Leonard Sanders finished reviewing the last details of an important presentation for the partners. However, his mind kept drifting back to Jenna and what he had discovered. Oliver had an audition in a few days. Although he tried to rationalize his interest as simple gratitude for Jenna's bravery, deep down, he knew it was more than that. Determined to help without her knowing, he had spoken to some contacts to ensure Oliver would have a fair and unbiased chance at the audition, but not all moves went unnoticed in the Sanders Tower. John Ortega, with his ears everywhere and an innate ability to uncover secrets, caught wind of Leonard's intervention. The news made him smile a crooked smile. He knew that the bond between Leonard and Jenna could become his trump card, and he decided it was time to act. The day of the audition arrived with an air of excitement and nervousness. Jenna carefully dressed Oliver, helping him put on a white shirt and his best pair of pants. Though his clothes weren't new, Oliver wore them with pride, aware of his sister's efforts. "Remember, Oliver, breathe deeply and focus on the music. Everything else will fade away," Jenna whispered to him before he went on stage. The small auditorium was filled with other children and their parents, some with shiny instruments and dressed in outfits that reflected their status. But Oliver stood firm, his gaze fixed on the jury. As he began to play, the melody rose clear and strong, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. However, halfway through the piece, a sudden technical failure interrupted his performance. A worn and fragile flute string broke, emitting a discordant sound that made some people look up in surprise, while others murmured. Oliver tried to continue, but the failure had broken his concentration, and the jury, though compassionate, looked at him with resignation. From the back of the auditorium, Jenna felt her heart break as she saw the disappointment in her brother's eyes. She knew that the mistake wasn't his fault, but she also understood that opportunities like this rarely gave second chances. As they left the auditorium, Oliver kept his head low, clutching the broken flute in his hands. Jenna knelt in front of him and hugged him, trying to hold back her tears. "You did well, Oliver. Very well," she said, though her voice was barely a whisper. That night, on their way home, the silence between them felt heavier than ever. Oliver's sadness was palpable, and guilt began to surface in Jenna. She wondered if her closeness with Leonard and the changes in her life were affecting things more than they were helping. She couldn't help but wonder if her brother was paying the price for her decisions. Meanwhile, in his office, Leonard learned what had happened at the audition, and a feeling of helplessness took over him. For the first time in years, the cold, calculating demeanor he was known for wavered. He wanted to do something, to fix it, but he knew that any move could make things more complicated. John, in his own office, smirked as he heard the rumor of Oliver's failure. The blow had been subtle, almost invisible, but enough to plant a seed of discouragement and doubt in Leonard. The audition, which had begun as a spark of hope, ended up as a reminder of the difficulties they faced, and a warning that the forces at play were more dangerous than they could imagine. The atmosphere in Jenna's small apartment was heavy with silence. Oliver's defeat at the audition had left a deep mark on both of them. Oliver, normally full of energy and always eager to practice with his flute, now sat on the bed with a distant look, his hands idly playing with the broken instrument. Jenna watched him from the kitchen, a lump in her throat making it hard to breathe normally. She wanted to find the right words to comfort him, but everything that came to mind felt hollow and weak. "Oliver, do you want me to make something special for dinner?" she asked, trying to break the silence with a cheerful tone that sounded forced, even to her. Oliver looked up for a moment, his eyes reflecting the pain of disappointment. He slowly shook his head and dropped his gaze again, without saying a word. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew more pronounced, marking a rhythm that accentuated the distance between them. That night, when Oliver finally fell asleep, Jenna stepped out onto the balcony and let the cool air of the city brush against her skin. The lights from the buildings shimmered like fallen stars, indifferent to the suffering of their inhabitants. Jenna clenched her fists and looked up at the sky, seeking comfort in the darkness. She couldn't help but wonder if her relationship with Leonard and the changes in her work life were causing more problems than benefits for Oliver. Guilt consumed her, and for the first time in a long time, she considered the possibility of leaving the company, distancing herself from everything that was putting her brother's stability at risk. Meanwhile, Leonard sat in his office, reviewing damage reports and recovery measures after the fire. However, his mind kept drifting back to Oliver's audition and the sadness on Jenna's face when she had left the building with the boy. He felt a mix of helplessness and frustration that he didn't know how to handle. He had spent years avoiding personal involvement with anyone, and now he found himself tangled in feelings and situations he couldn't control. The sound of a notification interrupted his thoughts. It was an email from Anna Miller, an employee who had begun to catch his attention due to her persistence and efficiency. Anna had been investigating certain financial moves within the company and had found troubling signs pointing directly at John. Leonard arranged to meet with her privately the next day, determined to face whatever was necessary to protect what mattered to him. John, on the other hand, was more than satisfied with the way things were unfolding. He knew that Leonard's closeness to Jenna was a card he could play at any moment, and Oliver's failure at the audition was just a reminder that he could manipulate circumstances to his advantage whenever he wished. As he reviewed some documents in his office, his confident smile reflected the satisfaction of a strategist watching his plans unfold perfectly. Anna, in her apartment, continued to wrestle with an internal battle. She had uncovered enough evidence of John's corrupt practices to expose him, but she knew that doing so would risk not only her job, but also Jenna's, whom she saw as a sister. Sleepless nights had become common as she reviewed the documents again and again, searching for a way to protect Jenna while revealing the truth. In the office, rumors about Leonard's growing attention toward Jenna continued to spread, and the employees' glances became more inquisitive. Jenna noticed every whisper and every sly smile, adding pressure to her already heavy burden. She felt that the initial admiration was turning into a weight she couldn't bear. Each day at the company became harder, and the image of Oliver, disillusioned and heartbroken, repeated in her mind like a painful echo. The tension was palpable, like a taut rope ready to snap. Jenna didn't know that John's shadow loomed over her more than she imagined, nor that Anna, with her own struggles, was about to make a decision that would change everything. Leonard, caught in a whirlwind of emotions and loyalties, was preparing for the confrontation ahead, unaware that the blow to Oliver's hope had only been the beginning of a much more dangerous and complex game. The days following Oliver's audition failure brought an atmosphere of uncertainty into Jenna's life. Although she tried to hold her head high and continue with her routine, the concern for Oliver and the weight of the gazes at the office were wearing her down. Anna's words about John and his dangerous influence echoed in her mind, but Jenna tried to stay out of it, focusing on protecting her brother and preventing her life from becoming even more complicated. Anna, on the other hand, knew the time to act was near. She had spent weeks investigating the accounts and financial moves involving John, and the evidence was becoming clearer. Fund diversion, fake contracts, and connections with other companies suggesting bribery, and manipulation. The implications were enormous, not only for John, but for the stability of the company. Anna was torn between her loyalty to Jenna and her duty to expose the corruption that, if left unchecked, could destroy everything Leonard had built. One afternoon, Anna decided to approach Leonard, taking advantage of the moment when John was out of the office. She stopped in front of his office door, took a deep breath, and knocked softly. Leonard looked up, and his expression softened upon recognizing her. "Anna, what brings you here?" he asked, standing up from his chair and pointing to a seat in front of him. Anna sat down, holding a folder with trembling hands. Her eyes reflected determination and a hint of fear. "Mr. Sanders, I need to talk to you about something important. I've been investigating certain financial moves in the company, and what I've found is serious," she said, handing over the folder. Leonard took the folder and opened it, reviewing the documents Anna had gathered. As he read, his face darkened and his jaw tightened. The evidence was clear and damning. John had been operating in the shadows for years, using the company for his own interests and undermining the business's stability. "Since when do you have this information?" Leonard asked, not taking his eyes off the papers. "For weeks. I couldn't stay silent, but I didn't want to act without consulting you first. I know this could have consequences for everyone, especially Jenna," Anna replied, her eyes searching Leonard's for a sign of understanding. Leonard closed the folder and sank into his chair. His thoughts raced. John's betrayal didn't surprise him entirely, but the magnitude of his actions and the way this could affect Jenna worried him more than he wanted to admit. Oliver's failure at the audition, the looks and rumors at the office, all these things were aligning in his mind like pieces of a sinister puzzle. Meanwhile, Jenna noticed a change in the atmosphere. John, who used to appear in the office with his calculating smile and malicious comments, now seemed more attentive to her movements. He had started to watch her more closely, and every time their eyes met, a chill ran down Jenna's spine. She couldn't ignore that something was brewing, something that was beyond her control. The tension reached a boiling point one night when, while reviewing some papers in the small office she shared with other assistants, John entered without warning. The dim light from her desk illuminated his expression, and his dark, cold eyes made her feel trapped. "Jenna, I've been hearing some interesting things lately. You seem to be at the center of a lot of attention," he said, dropping a folder onto the table in front of her. The sound of the folder hitting the table echoed in the room, cutting through the air. Jenna kept her composure, but her heart pounded in her chest. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Ortega," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. John stared at her for a few endless seconds before offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope that's the case, Jenna, for your sake and your brother's," he said, before turning and leaving the office. The veiled threat hung in the air, and when the door closed, Jenna felt her legs give way. She collapsed into the chair, trying to hold back tears. Oliver's safety was at risk, and for the first time, she understood that her proximity to Leonard might bring them more danger than she had imagined. Anna, leaving Leonard's office, felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew she had done the right thing by handing over the evidence, but she also understood that the storm it would unleash could put everyone in danger. What she didn't know was that Leonard was already preparing a plan that would not only confront John, but also protect Jenna and Oliver from the treacherous partner's grasp. As the city continued its incessant rhythm, the pieces in the Sanders Tower moved silently in a game that would define everyone's future. The weeks that followed the tense conversation with John were a whirlwind of emotions and fears for Jenna. The veiled threat that man had cast over her had etched a shadow of unease in her heart, and each day at the office felt like walking through a minefield. The curious glances of her co-workers, the whispers behind her back, and the unspoken questions that seemed to lurk around every corner made her doubt every step she took. Oliver, for his part, had regained some of his energy, but the sadness from the audition still lingered in his eyes, which no longer shone with the same intensity. Every morning, Jenna rose feeling the weight of her decisions. As she prepared for work, she would look at Oliver sleeping in his small bed, surrounded by music books and crumpled sheet music, and promise herself she would find a way to make things better for him. The thought of quitting and leaving the company had started to take shape in her mind, but something inside her, a mixture of courage and pride, kept her standing firm. The day everything changed began like any other. Jenna arrived at the Sanders Tower and tried to focus on her tasks, avoiding the inquisitive looks and hallway comments. During the coffee break, Anna approached her with an expression that mixed concern and determination. "How are you, Jenna?" Anna asked, handing her a cup of coffee. Jenna forced a smile and nodded, knowing that words alone weren't enough. "Surviving, I guess. You?" "You seem uneasy," Jenna replied, noticing the dark circles under her friend's eyes. Anna sighed and leaned a little closer, lowering her voice. "Leonard knows what's going on. I handed him the evidence about John," she said, hoping the information would bring Jenna some relief. But instead, she saw her friend's expression tighten with fear and confusion. "What does that mean?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The idea that Leonard might be confronting John over something related to her sent a chill down her spine. "It means John is on the ropes, and he knows it. But it also means things could get worse before they get better," Anna said, her serious gaze speaking volumes about the risks and difficult decisions ahead. Jenna nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. Before she could respond, a sharp pain in her stomach made her double over slightly. It wasn't the first time in recent days that she'd felt these pangs, but she had attributed them to stress and exhaustion. However, today the pain was more intense, and a slight dizziness clouded her vision. "Are you okay?" Anna asked, furrowing her brow. "Yeah, I just need some air," Jenna murmured, straightening up and taking a sip of coffee to hide the trembling in her hands. The day dragged on slowly, each second heavy with an underlying tension. At noon, Jenna decided it was time to face the reality of her symptoms. During her break, she left the office and went to the nearest clinic. She didn't expect anything serious. She just wanted confirmation that the fatigue and nausea were the result of accumulated stress. She sat in the waiting room, staring at the walls adorned with health campaign posters while she tried to calm her breathing. The doctor, a man with a gentle voice and calm gestures, welcomed her and listened attentively as she described her symptoms. After a quick examination and a few questions, he suggested a blood test and an ultrasound to rule out any serious issues. "It could just be stress, but it's always better to be sure," the doctor said, offering a reassuring smile. Jenna nodded and let the nurse guide her to the ultrasound room. The silence in the room was palpable, broken only by the soft hum of the equipment and the rhythm of her racing breath. When the screen lit up and the doctor began moving the transducer over her abdomen, Jenna felt every beat of her heart thundering in her ears. "Well, Jenna, it looks like we have a surprise here," the doctor said, his eyes focused on the screen. Jenna blinked, not understanding at first. What does that mean?" she asked, feeling a tingling anxiety run through her body. The doctor turned the screen toward her and pointed to two small dots on the image. "You're pregnant, and not just with one, but with twins," he announced, his voice still soft, but carrying a weight that made Jenna's world stop. The room seemed to spin, and the air grew thick. Jenna brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she processed what she had just heard. A wave of emotions washed over her: astonishment, fear, and an unexpected spark of hope. But soon, fear dominated her thoughts. How was she going to handle this new reality? How did Leonard fit into all of this? The walk back to the office was a blur of thoughts and emotions. Her legs trembled, and her hands were cold as she walked like a robot through the crowded streets. When she arrived at the tower, the familiar gazes of her co-workers seemed more penetrating than ever. She avoided eye contact and went straight to the bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and collapsed onto the seat. Tears ran down her face as she couldn't hold them back anymore. She was terrified, but at the same time, a small voice inside her told her that those two hearts beating inside her were an unexpected miracle, an opportunity for life in the midst of the storm. Meanwhile, Leonard had not stopped thinking about Jenna all day. Anna's reports on John had plunged him into deep concern. He knew confronting his partner would have consequences, but what he wasn't willing to allow was for anyone else to suffer because of his miscalculations. When he received an urgent call from his assistant informing him that John was calling for an informal partner meeting, he knew something was moving behind the scenes. The meeting took place in a small room, away from the bustle of the rest of the office. John sat at the head of the table, his expression a mix of seriousness and arrogance. Leonard arrived a few minutes later, maintaining his impassive demeanor, though his mind was in turmoil. "Thank you all for coming," John began, crossing his hands on the table. "I wanted to discuss some issues that have come up recently, especially regarding the direction the company is taking and the decisions some are making without consulting." John's eyes landed on Leonard, and the insinuation was obvious. Leonard prepared to respond, but before he could speak, the door suddenly opened. Anna entered, her face pale and her eyes filled with urgency. "I'm sorry for the interruption, but this can't wait," she said, placing the folder with the documents in the center of the table. John looked at her with a mix of disbelief and disdain, while the other partners leaned in to see what it was about. Leonard seized the moment of confusion to speak. "Anna has been investigating irregular practices in the company, and what she's found is concerning. This evidence directly implicates John in activities that go against the company's principles and the law," he said, his voice firm and with a spark of defiance in his eyes. The silence that followed was cutting. John stood up abruptly, his face now red with fury. "What kind of joke is this?" John growled, trying to maintain control, but the fear began to seep into his tone. "This is no joke," Anna replied, unwavering. "These proofs are real, and they can be corroborated. It's time we all knew the truth." The tension in the room shattered with the sound of notifications from the phones of several partners who were receiving emails with the same documents Anna had presented. John, seeing his facade crumble, glared at Leonard with a mix of hatred and desperation. But before he could react, the doors to the room opened once more, and two police officers entered with arrest warrants. As John was escorted out of the room, his screams of protest echoed down the hallway. Leonard watched the scene, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He knew the battle wasn't over, but at least they had taken an important step. After the meeting, Leonard found Anna in the hallway and thanked her for her courage. But the worry about Jenna still weighed heavily on his mind. Determined to find her, he walked through the office until he found the break room, where she was sitting, her eyes still red and her hands trembling. "Jenna, what's going on?" he asked, his voice low but filled with concern. She looked up, and upon seeing him, the tears flowed again. The words struggled to escape her lips, but in the end, a trembling whisper broke the silence. "I'm pregnant, Leonard, with twins." The world seemed to stop. The business worries, John's intrigues, everything faded in that moment. Leonard, still processing the news, approached Jenna and took her hands. "We'll get through this together," he said finally, his voice carrying an unshakable certainty that hadn't been present in a long time. The weight of the news was immense, but in the midst of uncertainty and fear, a spark of hope began to shine through the darkness. The days following Jenna's pregnancy revelation unfolded in a fog of intense emotions and uncertain decisions. Leonard, who had remained calm and composed when Jenna confessed the news to him, now sat in his office, torn between euphoria and anxiety. He had imagined many times the possibility of being a father, but always within the framework of medical treatments and frustrated hopes. Now, life was offering him the opportunity to form a family, albeit in the most unexpected and complicated way possible. Meanwhile, Jenna was dealing with an emotional roller coaster. The relief of having shared the news with Leonard intertwined with fear about the consequences. The glances at the office, the rumors that had spread like wildfire, and the looming threat of John, who now knew her situation, made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Each day she woke up knowing that a new challenge awaited her, and the constant tension was weighing more heavily than ever. At the Sanders Tower, the atmosphere had grown dense after John's downfall. Although most of the employees didn't know exactly what had happened, the sudden disappearance of the main partner and the rumors of a police investigation sparked a constant murmur in the hallways. Leonard kept his composure, reassuring the staff that the company would carry on. However, inside, he knew John wouldn't give up easily. The confirmation of that feeling came one afternoon when Leonard received an anonymous call. The voice on the other end was low and mocking, but he recognized it instantly. "You didn't think I'd leave without a fight, did you, Leonard?" John said, with a calmness that only someone who had already made a plan could possess. Leonard gripped the phone, his knuckles turning white. Rage and concern struck him at the same time. "You have nothing, John. You're finished," he replied, his voice firm, trying to conceal the tremor inside. John let out a dry laugh. "Oh, but I have more than you think. And I know things that could ruin you, both you and that lovely employee of yours, and her future children." The pause he made was calculated, and each word echoed in Leonard's mind like a blow. The silence that followed was chilling. The threat was clear, and Leonard knew that John always followed through on his promises. The fear for Jenna and the twins she was carrying settled in his chest, sparking a protective fury that he had never felt before. "If you touch a single hair on Jenna or my children, I promise you, there will be no corner of this world where you can hide," Leonard said, his voice low and dangerous. The line cut off without another word, leaving Leonard alone in his office, breathing heavily, his mind desperately searching for a solution. He knew the war with John had begun, and the first battle would be protecting Jenna and the babies. Unaware of the call Leonard had just received, Jenna was at home trying to keep calm. Oliver, sitting on the couch, was playing his flute with a soft and melancholic melody. The sound filled the room, and for a moment, it calmed Jenna's racing heart. But the tranquility was fleeting, shattered by a knock on the door that echoed with a dry thud. She stood cautiously and looked through the peephole. Seeing an envelope carefully placed on the floor, she opened the door and picked it up, noticing there was no return address. Her hands trembling, she opened it and found a single sheet of paper with a few words written in a familiar hand. "Think carefully about your decisions. Not everyone is lucky enough to survive fires." The message left her frozen, and a wave of nausea washed over her. Oliver turned to look when he heard the paper rustling, his innocent eyes filled with curiosity. "Is everything okay, Sophie?" he asked, setting the flute aside. "Yeah, just a wrong letter, nothing important," she said, trying to keep the calm in her voice. She couldn't let Oliver see the fear she was feeling. Leonard, having left his office impulsively, arrived at Jenna's home that night without warning. Seeing him at the door, she felt a moment of relief until she noticed the concern on his face. "We need to talk," he said, walking in before she could respond. Jenna closed the door and followed him into the living room, where Oliver was watching them with curiosity. Leonard gave him a strained smile and then turned to Jenna. "Oliver, why don't you play another melody for me while I talk to your sister?" he suggested, his voice trying to sound relaxed. Oliver nodded eagerly, always ready to show his talent. Leonard led Jenna to the small balcony, where the cool night breeze contrasted with the tension that radiated from both of them. "John called me," he began, and the words made Jenna's stomach tighten. "He knows about your pregnancy, and he's using it to threaten us." Jenna felt the air leave her body, and she had to lean against the railing to steady herself. "I received this today," she said, showing him the paper she had found at the door. Leonard took it, and his face hardened as he read it. Fury flashed in his eyes, and for a moment, Jenna saw a man who was willing to do anything to protect her. "I'm not going to let him touch you. I won't let him come near you or the children," Leonard said, in a tone that left no room for disagreement. "What are we going to do?" Jenna asked, her voice trembling as tears began to fill her eyes. Leonard looked at her, and in his expression there was more than just concern. There was love, a love he was only beginning to understand. He took her hands and held them firmly. "We're going to fight, and we're going to win, together." In the days that followed, Leonard put a plan into action to protect Jenna and Oliver. He hired private security and ensured that their apartment was monitored. At the same time, he worked on a strategy to dismantle John's remaining influence, though he knew the enemy was cunning and wouldn't back down without a fight. Anna, seeing the scope of the situation, redoubled her efforts to support Jenna. She made regular visits to her apartment and kept alert for any suspicious movements in the company. The tension in the office had reached a boiling point, with some employees sensing that something significant was unfolding. Meanwhile, John, hiding in the shadows, moved his own pieces. His contacts in the business circles provided him with information, and the rumors surrounding Leonard and Jenna were the fuel he needed to strike. He planned not only to destroy Leonard's reputation, but also to force him to relinquish control of the company, using public pressure as his weapon. The impending confrontation promised to be the most difficult of their lives, and though fear was inevitable, Jenna clung to Leonard's promise to protect her. With every passing day, she felt the life inside her grow and strengthen, giving her the hope and courage she needed to face whatever came. The shadows surrounding their lives had not dissipated, but the light of their unity and determination began to shine more brightly. The night in the city was a blend of flickering lights and shadows moving between alleys and imposing buildings. The Sanders Tower stood illuminated, a beacon of power and success, but also of intrigues and secrets that were beginning to come to light. While most employees were leaving for the day, Anna remained in her office, reviewing the documents she had gathered on John's illegal activities. Each number, each transaction, formed a puzzle she had carefully put together, and it had the power to change everything. Anna knew the situation was becoming more dangerous with each passing minute. The information she had already given to Leonard was just the tip of the iceberg. The additional evidence she now held in her hands could not only destroy John's career, but also shake the very foundations of the company. However, she knew that if John discovered she was the source, he wouldn't hesitate to act. Jenna, Oliver, and even Leonard would be in danger. As she rubbed her tired eyes, the voice of her brother Matteo echoed in her memory. He too had tried to expose the corruption in John's company years ago, and because of that, he had disappeared. The injustice of his loss and the fight for his memory drove every action Anna took. This wasn't just about protecting Jenna and her family. It was about seeking justice for Matteo. In Jenna's apartment, the nights continued to be a mixture of vigilance and fear. The presence of the security guards hired by Leonard gave her some peace of mind, but the fear still lingered. Oliver had noticed the change in the atmosphere, and though Jenna tried to hide it, the boy sensed that something was wrong. Instead of practicing with his flute, he stayed silent, watching his sister with a mixture of unease and questions he didn't dare ask. Leonard kept in constant contact with Jenna, visiting her apartment every night to make sure everything was in order. The moments they spent together were brief, marked by tension, but also by a silent understanding that grew between them. A hug, a glance full of promises, and the gentle touch of their hands were enough to reaffirm the connection between them. However, the calm was only apparent. John, from his hiding place, began moving his pieces. He had an ace up his sleeve, information about Leonard's relationship with Jenna and the pregnancy, which, if leaked, could turn into a media scandal that would force Leonard to give up part of the control of the company. He wasn't just seeking revenge, he was aiming to reclaim the position he had lost. The day everything came to a head began like any other, but Anna felt it was different the moment she woke up. She dressed in a simple suit and tied her hair in a high ponytail as she mentally reviewed her plan. She knew exposing herself was a huge risk, but there was no turning back now. The evidence was ready, and the call to the journalist she trusted, Luis Moreno, had to be made that morning. Luis Moreno was known for his ethics and commitment to the truth. He had worked on some of the toughest corruption stories in the city and wasn't afraid to face the powerful. Anna took a deep breath and dialed his number. The call went through, and Luis's deep and friendly voice answered on the other end. "Anna, it's good to hear from you. What do you have for me?" Luis asked, and Anna felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly at hearing his familiar tone. "I have information that will shake the foundations of the Sanders Corporation and expose John Ortega for the activities he's been covering up for years. I need you to make it all come to light, but I also need you to do it carefully. Not only am I in danger, but someone I want to protect is too," she said, without directly mentioning Jenna. Luis was silent for a moment, processing the gravity of what he had just heard. "Give me an hour, and I'll be at the usual place. Bring everything you've got, and make sure no one follows you," he replied. Anna nodded, even though he couldn't see her, and hung up. She stood up from her desk, packed the documents into a brown folder, and headed for the exit, her heart racing. She walked through the office with determined steps, but her senses were on high alert, catching every movement and every glance around her. She knew John still had contacts within the company, and any misstep could jeopardize her entire plan. On her way to the cafe where she was to meet Luis, Anna felt someone following her. She turned discreetly and saw a man with dark glasses and a long coat. Alarm bells went off in her mind, but she kept walking, clutching the folder against her chest. She arrived at the cafe and saw Luis sitting at a table by the window, with his laptop and a notebook. "Sit down and act normal," he told her, noticing the anxiety in her expression. Anna sat down and carefully placed the folder on the table, pushing it toward him. "Here it is. I need you to publish it as soon as possible. John has to be stopped before he does anything else," she said, her voice trembling. Luis opened the folder and began reviewing the documents. As he read, his expression hardened, realizing the magnitude of what he had in his hands. "This is bigger than I expected. We're going to need protection for you and for the person you mentioned. You can't go back to your office for now," he said, closing the laptop and packing the documents. Anna nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. She knew that by taking this step, there would be no going back. Meanwhile, at the Sanders Tower, Anna's absence hadn't gone unnoticed. Leonard, who was in his office, received a notification from one of the security guards informing him that they had seen a suspicious man loitering around Jenna's building. The concern in his chest grew, and without thinking twice, he left for the apartment. When he arrived, he found Jenna in the living room, with Oliver playing nearby. Their eyes met, and she knew instantly that something had changed. "What's going on, Leonard?" she asked, trying to stay calm as fear settled in her chest. "Anna has taken a step forward with the evidence, and someone is following her. We need to make sure you and Oliver are safe," he said, walking up to her and taking her hands. The warmth of his touch gave her a moment of comfort in the middle of the storm. "What do you mean by someone?" Jenna asked, her voice breaking. "John. He's playing his last card," Leonard replied, and the weight of his words fell upon them both like a heavy stone. That night, while the city continued its rhythm and the lights blinked in the distance, Anna remained in a safe location, awaiting the publication of the article. Jenna, with Oliver asleep in his room, sat beside Leonard on the couch. The two shared a silence full of promises and shared fears. Outside, the shadows moved, but inside that small apartment, Anna's decision and Leonard's commitment formed a barrier, a promise that, no matter what happened, they would fight to protect what they loved. As the night wore on, a sense of imminent change hung in the air. Anna had made her move, and the hours to come would decide the fate of everyone. The morning in the city arrived shrouded in a grey mist that filtered through the buildings and empty streets. The publication of the documents and the report on John Ortega's corrupt practices appeared in all the local media early on. The headlines were blunt: "The Hidden Partner, Corruption and Blackmail in the Sanders Empire." John's name repeated in articles, television segments, and social media posts, and the news spread like an uncontrollable fire. The details were shocking: embezzlement, bribes, and threats against employees to cover up his actions. John's downfall seemed inevitable. Anna, hidden in a safe place under the protection of journalist Luis Moreno, watched the hours go by as the report gained attention. She knew the impact of the news could go in any direction. While she had succeeded in exposing John and alerting the authorities, the price of her bravery was high. She couldn't return to the office or her apartment. Her life, as she knew it, had changed in the blink of an eye, all for the promise of justice for Mateo and to protect Jenna. Meanwhile, in the Sanders Tower, the shock was palpable. Employees moved quickly, whispering among themselves and casting uncertain glances. The tension, which had been simmering for weeks, erupted into a controlled chaos as calls were made, meetings were rescheduled, and calm was attempted to be maintained. Leonard sat in the boardroom, surrounded by board members who were demanding answers. He remained firm, though inside, a storm was raging. "Is it true, everything that's in that article?" one of the older partners, his brow furrowed and his tone harsh, asked. Leonard nodded, his gaze sweeping over each of the people present. "Yes, it's true. John Ortega has been manipulating company funds and blackmailing employees to protect his position. We have the proof, and it's already in the hands of the authorities," he said, his voice so firm it cut through the air. Murmurs intensified, and some partners exchanged looks of shock and concern. The news of the corruption affected them all. The company's reputation was at stake, and with it, the future of their careers and fortunes. "And what are we going to do to control the damage?" another partner asked, desperation in his tone. Leonard took a deep breath before responding. "What we've always done. Be transparent and responsible. The company will emerge from this with renewed leadership and a commitment to integrity. But I need you to trust me and the measures I'll take in the coming weeks," he explained. The meeting continued with discussions and preliminary agreements, but Leonard knew the real challenge lay outside, in the streets and in the media. He knew John wouldn't sit idly by, and the fear of what he might do still hammered in his mind. In Jenna's apartment, the news of the report didn't take long to arrive. Anna had sent a brief message. "I did it. Now everything depends on what happens in the next few hours. Be careful with John." The words were clear, but the unease they generated was impossible to ignore. Jenna felt a weight in her chest at the thought of what could happen if John decided to act. Oliver, unaware of the gravity of the situation, played with some of his toys on the carpet, his light laughter echoing in the room, providing a brief moment of relief to the tension surrounding Jenna. Leonard arrived shortly after, his face grave but determined. When Jenna saw him, she quickly stood up, her hands still trembling from the moment's tension. "Is it true? Did Anna do it?" she asked, without needing further explanations. Leonard nodded and approached her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Yes, she did. And she's caused an earthquake in the company and the city. But John isn't going to sit still. We need to be prepared," he said, his voice low but charged with an intensity that added weight to his words. "What does that mean for us?" Jenna asked, her eyes searching for answers in Leonard's face. "It means you need to stay here, with Oliver, under the protection of the guards. I'll handle the legal part and coordinate everything with the authorities. I won't let John get near you or the children," he replied, his tone unyielding. The hours passed slowly, each second heavy with expectation. The police began investigating John's operations more actively, and the media kept constant coverage of the scandal. Leonard's phone didn't stop ringing with calls from partners and reporters, but his thoughts always returned to Jenna and Oliver, to the fragility of the situation, and to what could still happen. John, from his hiding place, read the articles and watched the reports with a mix of fury and disdain. The evidence incriminated him, and the network of contacts he had built over the years began to crumble. However, he wasn't someone who accepted defeat. With the cunning of a cornered animal, he made one final call to a contact who owed him favors. The order was clear and precise. Send a message that made sure he still had control. In Jenna's apartment, the night fell with an eerie silence. The sound of sirens on the street and the occasional noise of cars felt amplified in the darkness. Leonard remained in constant contact with the guards at the building's entrance and with Anna, who sent him updates from her hiding place. The tension in the air was palpable, dense and suffocating. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door made Jenna and Leonard exchange an alarmed glance. Oliver, who was falling asleep on the sofa, jerked awake, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Stay here," Leonard whispered, pulling out his phone and dialing the number of one of the security guards. There was no answer. Another knock, this time more insistent, echoed through the apartment. Leonard approached the door, and before he could look through the peephole, a voice he recognized all too well spoke from the other side. "I know you're in there, Leonard, and I know Jenna's with you. Open the door, or things are going to get very complicated for all of us," John said, his tone controlled, but with an implied threat. Jenna felt the world crumbling around her. Her hands trembled, and cold sweat ran down her back. Leonard, with his jaw clenched and his heart pounding, looked at Jenna and nodded in a gesture that said, "Trust me." "I'll open, but don't try anything," Leonard said, raising his voice as he slid the lock open. The door opened, and John's figure appeared in the doorway. His eyes, dark and filled with rage, scanned the apartment until they stopped on Jenna. An icy silence settled in the room, interrupted only by Oliver's soft panting as, frightened, he looked at the adults without fully understanding what was going on. "This is nothing more than a reminder that, although I've lost some things, I still have control over others," John said, raising a finger and pointing at Jenna. "And you, Leonard, should have known that betraying a partner has consequences." Leonard stepped in front of John, his posture protective and defiant. "You have nothing, John. Your threats won't work. It's over," he replied, his voice shaking with contained fury. John let out a bitter laugh and took a step back. "You think so, but everyone has their breaking point, and I'll find yours," John said before turning and leaving the apartment, his departure leaving a deafening silence in its wake. Leonard closed the door and turned to Jenna, who collapsed onto the sofa, trembling. He sat beside her and wrapped her in a protective embrace as Oliver approached, seeking the security that only they could provide. John's words echoed in Leonard's mind, but his resolve was stronger. The battle wasn't over, but in that moment, with Jenna and Oliver by his side, he knew he would do whatever it took to protect them. The dim light from a lamp in the corner cast shadows on the wall, but in the heart of the makeshift family that was forming in that room, a spark of hope and resistance began to rise, something that nothing could extinguish. The dawn brought a momentary respite. The city began to wake from a night full of tension, and the light of the sun filtered through the curtains of Jenna's apartment, bathing everything in a soft golden glow. Jenna had barely slept, and the hours of vigil had left her mind foggy and her body exhausted. Leonard had spent the night in the small living room, his eyes never leaving the door, attentive to any strange sound that might indicate John's return. Oliver, after a few hours of fear and uncertainty, had finally fallen asleep, holding his old flute. The day that promised to be decisive had arrived. Anna, still hidden, continued sending messages to Leonard and the journalists, monitoring the reactions to the article that had exposed John's corruption network. The story was everywhere, and public pressure was beginning to mount. The authorities, though cautious, had already started the process of investigation and gathering testimonies, and the arrest warrant for John was in the works. Leonard knew time was running out, and they needed to act before John could counterattack with everything he had. He called for an emergency meeting with the board of directors for that same day. He needed to publicly expose what was happening and ensure that the company's control didn't descend into total chaos. The fear that John could influence some of the partners kept him on edge, but his determination to protect Jenna and Oliver gave him the strength he needed. Jenna, sitting at the kitchen table, stared at the coffee cup in her hands. The familiar aroma helped her calm down a little, but John's words from the previous night still echoed in her mind like a dark echo. She felt that Oliver's safety and the twins she carried were hanging by a thread, and the uncertainty made her tremble. When Leonard entered the room, he paused for a moment, seeing how defeated she looked. He approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Today is the day, Jenna. Today we face this together," he said, his voice aiming to convey confidence. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both fear and hope at the same time. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Leonard held her gaze, squeezing her shoulder lightly. "It won't go wrong. I won't let it," he said, with a firmness that calmed the storm in her chest a little. The clock struck 10 a.m. when Leonard arrived at the boardroom, accompanied by 2 lawyers and some members of the security team. The partners were already there, some with expressions of concern, others visibly annoyed by the media pressure. The leather chairs creaked as the men and women moved nervously, exchanging murmurs and glances. The room was decorated with sobriety, a polished mahogany table, walls covered with wood paneling, and large windows offering a panoramic view of the city. At the end of the table, the chair that John used to occupy was empty, a silent reminder of his fall from grace. Leonard cleared his throat and, with his gaze fixed on each of the partners, began. "We are here today because we need to speak frankly and responsibly. What has come to light in the last few hours is just the beginning of a transparency process this company needs," he said, his voice projecting authority. The partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but listened in silence. Some nodded, others frowned, but no one interrupted. John Ortega not only betrayed our trust and manipulated our finances, but he also put the stability of the company at risk. This isn't just about a scandal. It's about restoring the trust of all our employees and partners and protecting those who have been threatened by his actions, he continued, a flash of emotion in his voice as he thought of Jenna and Oliver. One of the partners, an older man with glasses and a neatly groomed beard, raised his hand. "Leonard, while all of this is true and the evidence is irrefutable, we must consider the repercussions. The actions have already begun to fall, and investors are worried. What are we going to do to protect the company while this storm passes?" he asked, his tone reflecting both concern and pragmatism. Leonard nodded, aware of the validity of the question. "I've been working with a team of lawyers and crisis management experts. We'll implement an internal audit and establish an ethics committee to oversee all operations. We'll also cooperate fully with the authorities to ensure justice is done," he responded, watching as some of the partners nodded slowly. The tension in the room seemed to ease slightly, but before anyone else could speak, the door to the boardroom suddenly opened. Everyone turned, surprised, to see John standing in the doorway. His eyes were bloodshot with fury, and a twisted smile spread across his face. "Have you already started assigning blame in my absence?" he said, taking a step forward as 2 security guards tried to stop him. With a swift movement, he raised a phone and held it in the air. "Before you say anything more, I want you to hear this," he added, pressing a button on the device. A recording began to play, a carefully edited conversation implicating Leonard in compromising and secret decisions regarding the handling of funds. The quality of the recording made it clear it had been manipulated, but the voices were unmistakable. Murmurs intensified in the room, and some partners stood up from their seats, murmuring among themselves. Leonard's expression shifted from surprise to anger. John had played his last card, trying to discredit him and create the chaos needed to regain some of his power. Leonard stepped forward, his eyes locked on John. "That recording is fake, and you know it. What kind of desperation drives you to this, John?" he asked, his voice controlled but full of disdain. John raised an eyebrow, his smile disappearing for a moment. "Desperation is a powerful motivator, Leonard. "Do you think you're the only one with resources?" he retorted, as the tension in the room reached a critical point. At that moment, the door opened again, and Anna entered the room, accompanied by 2 police officers. Her unexpected presence made the silence fall over the room. With steady steps, she moved to the center of the room and, without hesitation, placed another folder of documents on the table. "This is the rest of the evidence that proves John Ortega's manipulation and how he tried to sabotage the integrity of the company and its leadership," she said, her voice clear and determined. The police officers stepped forward and took John by the arms. His expression of surprise turned into fury as the partners watched in shock. "This isn't over, Leonard. This is just the beginning," John said, as he was escorted out of the room, his words lingering like a threat suspended in the air. When the door closed, Leonard looked at Anna, and a small gesture of gratitude crossed his face. The tension in the room slowly began to dissipate, and the murmurs of the partners turned into sighs of relief and nods of agreement. "Thank you, Anna," Leonard said, his sincerity needing no further explanation. Anna nodded and stepped back, allowing Leonard to take control of the situation. "This has been a tough blow, but we will rise from this stronger. Transparency and truth are our most powerful weapons, and we won't let John's shadow define our future," Leonard concluded, looking at the partners with a determination that, for the first time in a long time, seemed unshakable. The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, but in the Sanders Tower, the pieces were starting to rearrange, marking the beginning of a new phase. As the partners left, Leonard stayed for a moment, gazing out the window, the sun bathing the city and promising a different day. The battle had been won, but he knew the war wasn't over. However, thinking of Jenna, Oliver, and the twins that were on the way, he knew he was ready to face whatever was necessary. The city continued to roar with the intensity of the headlines reflecting John Ortega's fall and the scandal that had shaken the Sanders empire. The news spread through the streets like a storm. The media issued constant updates, and analysts discussed on television the implications of what was now known as the Ortega case. The company had withstood the blow, but the road to regain the trust of its partners and the public was just beginning. Leonard felt exhausted, but the relief that ran through him was palpable. The scene in the boardroom, with John being escorted by the police, had been a moment of justice he would not forget. However, as the partners and employees began to process what had happened, his mind was focused on Jenna and Oliver. The urgency to see them and ensure they were okay drove him to leave the tower and head to the apartment. The journey to Jenna's home, though short, felt eternal. Leonard's thoughts revolved around the threat John had made before being arrested. He knew that, even though the man was behind bars, his influences and contacts could still try to destabilize him. But he also knew that Jenna, Oliver, and the twins were his priority. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and his heart beat fast as he parked in front of the building and rushed up the stairs 2 at a time. When Jenna opened the door, the relief in her eyes was evident. Without saying a word, Leonard embraced her, enveloping her in warmth and strength that momentarily erased the fear and uncertainty that had been consuming her. Oliver appeared behind her, looking at Leonard with curiosity and a shy smile. "Is it over?" Oliver asked, his voice soft and full of hope. Leonard released Jenna and knelt to Oliver's level, offering a smile. "Yes, little one. For now, everything is in order," he replied, placing a hand on the child's shoulder and giving him an affectionate squeeze. The atmosphere in the apartment lightened. The accumulated tension slowly faded, replaced by the sense of security Leonard brought with him. Jenna guided him to the living room, where they sat on the sofa as Oliver returned to his toys, though from time to time he glanced at the adults, as if needing constant reassurance that everything was okay. "Is Anna okay?" Jenna asked, breaking the silence and looking into Leonard's eyes for an answer. "Yes, she's fine. She showed up at the meeting with the police and the evidence we needed. John is in custody, and although this isn't entirely over, we've won an important battle," Leonard explained, taking Jenna's hand and interlocking their fingers. The weight of Leonard's words filled Jenna with relief. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe without feeling something threatening hanging over them. But still, the uncertainty of what would come next lingered. That night, Leonard stayed at the apartment with Jenna and Oliver. It was a refuge where worries were left outside, at least for a few hours. As the soft light of the lamp illuminated the room, Leonard told stories from his childhood, stories he hadn't shared with anyone in years. Jenna listened attentively, laughing occasionally and noticing how his voice, usually controlled and serious, softened, revealing the man behind the businessman. Oliver, who had been drawing in a notebook, looked up and smiled. "Do you have any stories from when you learned to play an instrument?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. Leonard chuckled softly and shook his head. "I was never good with instruments, Oliver. I tried the piano, but after breaking 3 keys in 1 month, my teacher decided I should probably focus on other things," he said, causing the child to burst out laughing and Jenna to smile. That laughter and those moments of connection felt like balm after everything they had been through. Yet deep in Leonard's mind, John's warning still resonated. He knew the peace wouldn't be permanent, and he would have to take steps to ensure the threats didn't repeat. The next morning, the city continued to buzz with the news of John's arrest and his involvement in his crimes. The calls from the media and questions from company employees were incessant, but Leonard remained firm in his plan for full cooperation with the authorities and the company's restructuring. Anna, now regarded as a heroine by some employees, was called to join the new Ethics and Transparency Committee. She accepted the position with the condition that policies would be implemented to protect employees from retaliation and threats like the ones she had faced. Anna and Jenna's first meeting after the recent events was emotional. They met at a nearby cafe, a place they had frequented before everything started falling apart. Upon seeing each other, they embraced tightly, feeling how the burden of the last weeks began to dissipate. "You did it, Anna. You saved the company and you saved us all," Jenna said, her eyes shining with gratitude and a sincere smile. Anna pulled back slightly and nodded, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I did it for Matteo, but I also did it for you, for Oliver, for everyone who deserves to work in a place where they don't have to fear for their lives," she replied, taking Jenna's hand and giving it a firm squeeze. Meanwhile, at the company, Leonard oversaw the first meetings of the Internal Audit and Ethics Committee. The company needed to rebuild from the inside, and he knew that transparency and integrity were now more important than ever. However, the recovery process would be long and arduous. That night, Leonard visited Jenna once more. The conversation revolved around plans for the future, the twins on the way, and Oliver, who was gradually regaining his confidence and love for music. Oliver's smile as he played his flute in the corner of the room became a symbol of overcoming, a reminder that, although darkness had tried to envelop them, there was always a way toward the light. "Leonard," Jenna said, breaking the silence while watching Oliver play, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Leonard looked at her and gently shook his head. "You don't have to thank me for anything. We're a family, Jenna, and family takes care of each other," he replied, his words full of sincere emotion. The hug they shared was long, filled with promises of a future full of hope and a love that, though born in the most complicated of circumstances, had grown stronger with every challenge. Peace was not perfect, and the echoes of past threats still reverberated in the distance. But in that moment, with Oliver playing a cheerful melody and the twins growing in Jenna's womb, the certainty that together they could face anything was stronger than ever. The atmosphere in the city, though calm on the surface, still held an undercurrent of tension. The news of John Ortega's arrest still dominated newspaper headlines and debate shows on television. Social media had become a hotbed of divided opinions. Some praised Leonard and Anna for exposing the corruption, while others questioned how the Sanders Company had allowed something like this to happen under its roof. Leonard knew the company he had built with such effort was now under scrutiny that would require much more than words to overcome. At the Sanders Tower, the rhythm of work had changed. Meetings followed one another, and employees moved with the caution of those who fear waking a sleeping giant. Anna, in her new position on the Ethics Committee, had already begun implementing significant changes, and although some employees looked at her with suspicion, most respected her for her integrity and bravery. Leonard had made it clear that the new times brought with them a new way of doing things. Meanwhile, Jenna was trying to find a balance between her work and preparing for the arrival of the twins. Morning sickness and fatigue followed her like persistent shadows, but the strength she felt when looking at Oliver and thinking about the babies gave her the drive she needed to keep going. Anna frequently visited her apartment, bringing not only news from the office, but also a shoulder to lean on and laughter that lightened the mood. One afternoon, while Jenna was reviewing some papers at the kitchen table and Oliver practiced a new piece on his flute, an unexpected call interrupted the moment of calm. It was Leonard, and his voice, though controlled, hinted at an urgency that made Jenna sit up straight immediately. "I need you to listen closely, Jenna. John has hired a high-profile lawyer, and he's using all his contacts to find a way to get out on bail. The prosecution is working to prevent it, but we need to be prepared," Leonard said, his voice filled with concern. Jenna closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The thought that John could be free again sent a chill down her spine. "What does that mean for us?" she asked, trying to remain calm. "It means we need to increase security and be careful with every move. I've already spoken with the guards, but I want you to stay close to the apartment and not go out without letting me know." "I don't want him catching us off guard," Leonard replied, his voice firm yet gentle. The day passed with a sense of tense waiting. Jenna avoided the news and focused on Oliver, helping him with his studies and talking about the plans for the twins' arrival. Oliver, who had regained some of his energy and enthusiasm, excitedly spoke about how he was going to teach the babies to play the flute, bringing a smile to his sister's face. That evening, Leonard arrived at the apartment, loaded with bags of food and an expression of exhaustion that Jenna immediately recognized. The meeting with the prosecution and the lawyers had been long and complicated, filled with legal details and discussions on how to handle John's case. After a simple dinner in the living room, Oliver went to bed, leaving the adults sitting on the sofa, surrounded by a silence that neither seemed eager to break. "Today was a tough day," Leonard finally said, massaging the bridge of his nose. "I know. I've been thinking about it all afternoon," Jenna responded, her eyes searching Leonard's for a certainty he himself couldn't offer her. "No matter what happens, I won't let anyone hurt you," he said, turning toward her and taking her hand. The warmth of his skin and the firmness of his voice were enough to calm, even if only slightly, the anxiety Jenna felt. At that moment, the sound of a notification on Leonard's phone broke the stillness. He looked at the screen and saw a message from one of the security guards. "Suspicious movement near the building. Everything is under control for now, but we remain on alert." Leonard's heart skipped a beat, and Jenna noticed how his expression changed instantly. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "The guards saw something, but they say it's under control. Don't worry," he lied, knowing that the last thing he wanted was to alarm her further. The hours that followed were long and filled with tension. Leonard decided to stay at the apartment, watching the security cameras from his phone and periodically checking updates from the guards. Finally, the night passed without further incident, but the unease remained, like a shadow that couldn't be ignored. The morning arrived with a clear sky that contrasted with the uncertainty still hanging over them. Leonard kissed Jenna on the forehead before heading to the company, where another round of meetings and preparations awaited to face John's next move. Anna, who had arrived early, intercepted him in the hallway. "We need to talk. John is moving contacts in the press. Rumor has it he's going to leak information that could compromise you," she said bluntly. Leonard nodded, not surprised. He knew John's attack wouldn't be just legal, it would also be media-driven. He had spent a lot of time preparing for such a blow, but knowing it didn't make the threat any less real. "Prepare for a press conference. We'll get ahead of him," he replied, the determination etched in every line of his face. The conference was held that same afternoon, called in haste and broadcast on all news channels. Leonard, in an impeccable suit and with a firm look, stood before a sea of cameras and eager reporters. Anna and some members of the ethics committee accompanied him, presenting an image of unity. "Today, I want to reaffirm our commitment to truth and transparency. We will not allow anyone, no matter their power or influence, to undermine the principles on which we've built this company," he began, his voice resonating with a calm that hid the effort behind each word. The journalists threw questions in rapid succession, some inquisitive, others more accusatory, but Leonard kept his composure. He explained the steps they were taking to cooperate with the authorities and how the company was being restructured to ensure that situations like those involving John would never happen again. However, just as the conference seemed to be coming to an end, a reporter raised his hand and asked the question Leonard had feared. "Mr. Sanders, rumors say you've been personally involved with an employee of the company, which could compromise the ethics of your leadership. Is that true?" he asked, with a gleam of inquiry in his eyes. Silence fell like a weight over the room. Anna, who was standing to the side, looked at Leonard with a mixture of concern and support. Leonard took a deep breath and prepared to answer, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. "I will not deny that I have developed a personal relationship with someone I deeply admire and who has shown a bravery and integrity that few possess. But I want to make it clear that my commitment to this company and to all of you remains unshaken. I will not let John's attacks or the rumors undermine what we've accomplished and what we will continue to build together," he said, his voice resonating with a mix of vulnerability and firmness that left the reporters momentarily speechless. The cameras captured every second, and Leonard's face reflected a determination that seemed invulnerable. Jenna, who was watching the conference from home with her heart in her throat, felt tears begin to run down her cheeks. It was a detonation that changed everything, but also a promise that, no matter what came, they would face whatever was necessary, together. The storm had not passed yet, but Leonard's public statement and the confirmation of his relationship with Jenna marked a new chapter, one where truth and loyalty faced off against power and ambition. And although they knew the challenges were not over, the certainty that they were together gave them the strength to keep moving forward, even through the darkest days that might come. The echo of Leonard's press conference spread through the city like wildfire. Newspapers and television programs quickly analyzed every word and gesture, while social media buzzed with divided opinions. Some saw him as a leader who had finally shown his human and courageous side, willing to face adversity and protect what mattered most to him. Others, however, were less understanding. The reporter's comments about his personal relationship with an employee sparked a torrent of criticism and questions about Leonard's ethics and impartiality as the company's CEO. At Jenna's apartment, the atmosphere was tense. She had watched the conference live and couldn't help but tear up when she heard Leonard's statement. But along with the emotion came concern. She knew that John's words were not just an empty threat, and that he had begun a calculated move to discredit Leonard and destroy everything he had built. Oliver, unaware of the media storm, was focused on his flute, filling the room with a soft melody that contrasted with the weight of the news. Jenna stroked her belly, where the twins were growing day by day, and forced herself to stay strong. Her children and Oliver depended on her, and although fear was a constant companion, her determination to protect them outweighed it. The first call she received after the conference was from Anna. Her friend's voice, though calm, betrayed the weariness and concern she was feeling. "Jenna, I watched the conference. Leonard did what many wouldn't dare, but now we have to be more cautious than ever. John will exploit any weakness he sees," Anna said, her tone making it clear she was already thinking about the next steps. "I know, Anna. I just want this to be over once and for all," Jenna responded, her voice trembling slightly. "It will end, and we'll make sure it's in our favor. I'm going to talk to some contacts at the prosecution to speed things up and make sure John doesn't have a chance of getting bail. Stay alert and don't go out alone, okay? Anna paused, waiting for a response. Okay, I won't, Jenna promised, feeling how Anna's support gave her a little strength. At the office, Leonard faced the aftermath of his statement. Some partners were distant, while others supported him privately, acknowledging his courage. The meetings with lawyers and the public relations team were constant, and every minute that passed, he felt like he was fighting a battle on multiple fronts. But what worried him most were the personal repercussions that Jenna and Oliver might face. As he reviewed documents in his office, he received a call from the company's security director. His tone was urgent and left no room for calm. "Mr. Sanders, we've received a tip that someone might try to approach Mrs. Brown. The source isn't fully reliable, but we think it's better to be safe," he reported, and Leonard felt a chill run down his spine. "I want more guards sent to her building, and the surveillance reinforced. No risks," he ordered, his voice firm and authoritative. The afternoon passed with the feeling that something was about to happen. Hours passed, and the activity in the city slowed down. But at Jenna's apartment, time seemed to stop. She couldn't take her eyes off the window, watching as cars passed by on the street and pedestrians walked back and forth. A group of security guards discreetly patrolled the building, and their presence was a constant reminder of the threat still hanging over them. Shortly after dusk, Jenna's phone vibrated with a message from Anna. "John has requested an emergency hearing for tomorrow. Don't worry, we're prepared." Anna's words tried to convey calm, but Jenna knew that meant John's last attempt to gain ground. The idea of him being freed terrified her, and although she trusted Leonard and Anna, fear was a shadow she couldn't shake. Leonard arrived shortly after receiving the news, his expression more serious than usual. He approached Jenna and hugged her without saying anything, as if that simple act could convey the security she so desperately needed. "John is looking for ways to weaken our position, but we're ready to face him. Tomorrow's hearing is crucial," he said, his words firm but filled with a special care. "And what if it goes wrong, Leonard?" Jenna asked, unable to stop her voice from wavering slightly. "It won't go wrong. I won't let it," he replied, with a certainty that, though unshakable, couldn't erase the uncertainty hanging in the air. The night passed slowly, as if time wanted to prolong the waiting. Oliver fell asleep in his room, and Jenna and Leonard sat in the living room, each lost in their thoughts. The room was silent except for the distant hum of passing cars and the occasional creak of the wood in the walls. When the first rays of sunlight entered through the window, the city woke to a new day full of expectations. The hearing to determine whether John Ortega could be released on bail would take place in a few hours, and the tension was palpable. Anna prepared to accompany Leonard to the hearing, while Jenna stayed home, surrounded by the security guards Leonard had reinforced. Oliver, though he had noticed the seriousness on the adults' faces, remained oblivious to the details and went about his morning routine. In the courthouse, the room was filled with journalists and onlookers. The anticipation was high, and the atmosphere was palpable. Leonard entered accompanied by his lawyers and Anna, who walked beside him with her head held high. When John was escorted to the stand, the murmurs intensified. His gaze was cold, and although his appearance was more haggard than before, the spark of defiance still shone in his eyes. The judge, a man with a severe face and a deep voice, called the room to order and asked for the arguments to be presented. John's lawyer, a shrewd man known for defending controversial cases, presented his request for bail, arguing that his client did not pose a danger and that the evidence was circumstantial. Anna felt anger rise in her chest, but kept her composure. When the prosecution's turn came, they presented the evidence that Anna and Leonard had gathered, including testimonies from employees and documents confirming John's illicit acts. The exchange of arguments lasted for hours, and every word spoken made everyone's future hang by a thread. Finally, the judge made his decision. The tension in the room was palpable as he spoke, every syllable weighing heavily. "John Ortega, Due to the nature of the charges and the evidence presented, this court denies his request for bail. He will remain in custody until the trial, he announced, striking the gavel against the wood. A collective sigh passed through the room, and Leonard closed his eyes, letting relief wash over him completely. John, fists clenched, was escorted out of the courtroom while muttering something no one could hear. When Leonard and Anna left the courthouse, camera flashes surrounded them, but neither stopped to answer questions. Leonard only wanted to get to Jenna's apartment and give her the news. And so he did, walking through the door with an expression that, for the first time in days, showed true relief. "John stays in custody until the trial," he said, unable to suppress the smile that spread across his face when he saw the relief in Jenna's eyes. The hug they shared was long, and within it, all the repressed emotions of the past days fused: fear, relief, and the certainty that, at least for now, they were safe. But they knew the fight wasn't over. The trial would be the next challenge. But at that moment, with the weight of the immediate threat lifted, they allowed themselves to enjoy a moment of peace and hope. The storm that John had brought with him was starting to dissipate, but the promise of a new dawn gave them the strength to face whatever was still to come. The days following the hearing in which John Ortega was denied bail brought an unusual, almost deceptive calm. The city continued with its hustle and relentless pace, but for Leonard and Jenna, the pause was a breath of relief after weeks of distress. However, peace was never absolute, and although John was in custody, his shadow still cast a latent threat that no one dared ignore. Life in the Sanders Tower was beginning to adapt to the new reality. Anna dedicated herself to her work in the Ethics Committee, organizing workshops and talks on transparency and good practices, aiming to rebuild trust among the employees. The company showed signs of recovery, but Leonard knew that John's trial would be a litmus test, a media spectacle that would test everyone again. In Jenna's apartment, the routine was beginning to stabilize. Oliver had resumed his practice with the flute, and despite the ups and downs, the smile that appeared on his face when he played was a balm for Jenna. The twins were growing day by day, and Jenna noticed how their movements in her belly were becoming more frequent and vigorous. The pregnancy, which at first had been a source of fear and uncertainty, was now a constant reminder of life and hope. Leonard, for his part, divided his time between the company and the apartment, where he spent every night with Jenna and Oliver. Shared dinners, conversations about the future, and small moments of peace had become his anchor amidst the chaos. However, the calm was fragile, and both of them knew it. One night, while Leonard was reviewing some documents in the living room and Jenna was making tea in the kitchen, an unexpected call interrupted the stillness. It was Anna, and her urgent tone made Leonard stand up immediately. "Leonard, we have a problem. One of John's contacts in the company has been identified and arrested, but before that, he managed to send a message to the press. We need to prepare for a potential media attack in the next few hours," she said, her tone heavy with concern. Leonard felt the adrenaline rush through his body. He knew the battle with John wasn't just fought in courtrooms, but also in public opinion. "Do you have details about what was leaked?" he asked, his mind already formulating plans and contingencies. "Not completely, but it involves your statement about Jenna and rumors that could damage her image. We need to act fast to control the narrative," Anna responded. Leonard nodded, although he knew Anna couldn't see him, and ended the call with a promise. They'd be ready for whatever came. He turned toward Jenna, who had been watching from the kitchen, noticing the tension on her face. "We need to talk, Jenna. The press might try to use our relationship and the pregnancy against us. I don't want you to panic, but I want you to be prepared," he said, walking toward her and taking her hands. Jenna took a deep breath, feeling the fear she had managed to keep at bay begin to surface again. "I knew it. Sooner or later they'd try to attack us for this," she replied, trying to maintain composure. Leonard nodded and looked at her with a mix of concern and admiration. "But we're not going to let them take away what we've built. "We are stronger than anything John and his allies might try," he said, his voice firm and confident. The following hours became a race against time. Leonard and Anna met with the company's public relations team to plan a proactive response to any media attacks. Security measures around Jenna and Oliver were reinforced, and the guards in the building were put on high alert. The sense of calm they had begun to enjoy quickly faded, replaced by urgency and preparation for the impact. The next morning, the first news stories began to emerge. A sensationalist tabloid published an article with the headline, "The Double Life of Leonard Sanders, Forbidden Romance in the Sanders Tower." The content of the article insinuated that Jenna had used her relationship with Leonard to gain advantages, and that the pregnancy was an attempt to secure her future in the company. Although the accusations were unfounded and the details inaccurate, the potential damage was done. Social media filled with comments, some supportive and others filled with judgment. Jenna saw the article on her phone while having breakfast. The hurtful words and insinuations pierced her chest like needles. She felt a lump in her throat, and tears threatened to fall, but she forced herself to breathe deeply and stay strong. She couldn't afford to break down, not when Oliver and the twins depended on her. Leonard arrived at the apartment shortly after, his expression one of restrained fury. "I saw it," Jenna said before he could speak. Their eyes met, and although sadness was evident in them, there was also a spark of defiance. "We'll respond, Jenna. I'm not going to let anyone drag you through the mud," Leonard said, sitting beside her and wrapping his hand around hers. "It's not just for me, Leonard. It's for Oliver, for the twins. I don't want them to grow up with this shadow over them," Jenna replied, her voice trembling but determined. Leonard nodded, understanding the depth of her words. It wasn't just about protecting her. It was about protecting the whole family they were building. With that conviction, he headed to the office, where Anna and the public relations team were already working on a statement that would address the accusations and reaffirm the company's position, as well as Leonard's role as the leader. Hours later, Leonard and Anna faced another press conference. This time, the room was even more crowded with journalists looking for a statement that would fuel the fire. Leonard approached the microphone, with Anna by his side, and a look that radiated calm and control. "We're here today to clarify the lies and insinuations that have been made about me and Jenna Brown, a person who has demonstrated admirable integrity and bravery. The relationship we share has been treated with respect and without any conflict of interest. But most importantly, we will not allow rumors to damage the image of a dedicated mother and a woman who has worked hard for what she has," he began, his voice resonating in the room. Anna continued, explaining the company's policies and how safeguards had been put in place to ensure integrity at all levels. The conference ended on a note of firmness and responsibility, and although it didn't deter all the detractors, it made it clear that neither Leonard nor Jenna would be intimidated. At home, Jenna watched the conference with Oliver, who, although not fully understanding the situation, took his sister's hand and smiled at her. "You don't have to worry, Sophie. Everything's going to be okay," he said, with the certainty of a child who still sees the world without the shadows that adults face. Jenna hugged him tightly, feeling how the hope she so desperately needed reignited within her. Leonard returned to the apartment that night, and when he saw Oliver asleep and Jenna waiting for him with a faint but genuine smile, he knew that, although the storm still raged, they had found a safe harbor in their union. The battle was not over, but every step they took together made them stronger, more prepared to face whatever came next. And although the shadows of the past tried to engulf them, the light of their determination shone brighter than ever. The impact of Leonard and Anna's press conference reverberated in the following days, dividing opinions and raising even more questions. The sensationalist accusations from the media, fueled by the rumors orchestrated by John from his confinement, began to lose steam against Leonard's strong and transparent response. However, the aftermath remained present at every corner, every conversation, and every furtive glance that Jenna noticed when she left her apartment. The pressure was constant. The tabloids kept searching for stories that would exploit the scandal, trying to uncover any detail they could twist to keep the public's attention. But Jenna, strengthened by Leonard and Anna's unwavering support, decided not to let fear consume her. She woke up every day with the determination to show that the truth and hard work could overcome the shadows that tried to bury her. One morning, as Oliver played one of his favorite melodies and the sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the small apartment, Jenna received a call from Anna. Her voice, though calm, carried an underlying tone of concern. "Jenna, there's something you need to know. Authorities have reported that some of John's allies, people we suspected but had no proof of, have been arrested. However, one of them leaked some of your personal documents to the press," she said, pausing to let the words sink in. Jenna felt the air leave her lungs for a moment. The thought that her personal life could be exposed and manipulated was terrifying. The images of Oliver, the pregnancy records, everything she had carefully protected, was now at risk of being exposed. "What kind of documents?" she asked, her voice trembling as she tried to stay composed. "Photos and details about your life and Oliver's. But don't worry, Leonard is already working with the lawyers to stop the publication and make sure that whoever leaked this information faces consequences," Anna replied, her voice steady, trying to calm Jenna's fears. "Thank you, Anna," Jenna murmured, gripping the edge of the table to keep herself upright. When Leonard arrived at the apartment later that morning, his expression revealed a mixture of fury and exhaustion. He had spent the night working with his legal team and authorities, trying to contain the damage and trace the source of the leak. Jenna met him with a look full of questions, and without waiting for her to speak, he wrapped her in a hug that conveyed a mix of protection and determination. "We'll do whatever it takes to stop this, Jenna. I won't let anyone hurt you or Oliver," he said, gently squeezing her hands. "I know, Leonard. I just want this to end," she replied, her eyes filled with unshed tears that she struggled to hold back. The day continued with calls, meetings, and strategies. Leonard's lawyers presented a court order to stop the publication of the leaked documents, while Anna and her team reinforced security measures and worked to prevent further leaks. Hours passed slowly and heavily, as if time itself were torturing them with uncertainty. By evening, an unexpected piece of news emerged from the media. John, from his cell, had granted an exclusive interview to an unethical journalist who had managed to get in under a false pretense. In the interview, John portrayed himself as a martyr, suggesting that everything he had done was in the name of corporate justice and that Leonard had manipulated the truth to protect his own interests. Although his words were a mix of lies and half-truths, the damage was already done. The media jumped on the story to fuel the controversy, and social media exploded with comments and conspiracy theories. That night, Jenna's apartment became a refuge for planning and strategy. Leonard, Anna, and a group of lawyers gathered in the living room, while Oliver slept in his room, oblivious to the commotion. Jenna, though exhausted, stayed close by, listening and absorbing every word. The conversation revolved around how to face John's media attack and protect Jenna and Oliver from public exposure. "We need a statement that not only denies his accusations, but also reinforces Jenna's image and makes it clear that this is just another desperate attempt by John to manipulate the narrative," said one of the lawyers, his tone firm as he made notes in his notebook. "It's not just the statement," Anna interjected. "We need to show that John is pulling strings from prison and that his resources are still dangerous. If we expose that, we'll weaken his credibility once and for all." Leonard nodded, but his eyes rested on Jenna. Though she remained upright and attentive, he could see the fatigue and distress the situation was causing her. "Jenna, I know this is a lot, but I want you to know that, no matter what happens, you're not alone in this," he said, breaking the silence that had settled in the room. Jenna looked at him and nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I know I'm not, and I'm not going to let John win, not after everything we've been through," she replied, with a determination that even surprised Anna. The strategy discussed that night involved several key moves. First, a new public statement would be released to reinforce transparency and Jenna's innocence, while the lawyers continued to work on blocking any publication that compromised her privacy. At the same time, Anna would contact some trusted journalists who could publish the truth behind John's moves and his allies. The next day, Leonard and the public relations team's statement was broadcast across all media. This time, it included details about the evidence pointing to John orchestrating the attack from prison, as well as the company's commitment to protect its employees and leaders. While some sensationalist media outlets tried to keep the focus on the rumors, the narrative began to shift in favor of Leonard and Jenna. Support from former employees who had worked with Jenna and knew her story also began to surface. Social media posts and interviews painted the picture of a woman who had always worked hard and faced adversity without asking for anything in return. This helped shift the perception and reinforce the idea that John's accusations were nothing more than a desperate attempt for revenge. At the end of the day, Leonard and Jenna sat in the living room, watching the news and the comments on social media. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of change in the air. The responses were starting to bear fruit, and although John's trial was still on the horizon, things were looking more promising. "I can't believe we're here, watching how everything starts to get resolved," Jenna said, her voice reflecting both exhaustion and hope. "We've come this far together, and that's how we're going to keep going," Leonard replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. The sound of Oliver's flute, which he had started practicing in his room, filtered into the living room. The melody, soft and clear, became a symbol of what they were protecting. A life that, despite all the difficulties, deserved to be lived in peace and with love. Although the battle was not over, the steps they had taken together had brought them closer to the truth and justice. And that night, as the shadows retreated with the sound of Oliver music as a backdrop, Leonard and Jenna knew that, no matter what happened, they were ready to face it together. The day of John Ortega's trial arrived with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. The city, which had been following every twist of the story, was preparing to witness the final showdown between the disgraced former partner and the Sanders Corporation, which had managed to stay afloat under Leonard's leadership. The courtroom was filled with journalists, employees, and curious onlookers who wanted to witness the moment when the truth would finally prevail. Leonard, dressed in a sharp, dark suit, entered the courtroom accompanied by Anna and his legal team. His expression was one of calculated calm, but his eyes reflected the tension of the moment. Jenna, though unable to be present due to her advanced pregnancy, was connected at all times through Anna and Leonard. From her apartment, she watched the live broadcast, with Oliver by her side, who, though he didn't understand all the details, knew that this was an important day. The trial began with the prosecution's presentation. They presented the evidence Anna had gathered, testimonies from employees and former collaborators, and documents linking John to embezzlement, blackmail, and threats. Each piece of evidence was presented with precision, leaving no room for doubt. Anna, sitting next to Leonard, could feel the pressure building, but she remained composed, ready for whatever might arise. John, with the handcuffs gleaming on his wrists and a sarcastic smile on his lips, surveyed the room with a mixture of contempt and defiance. Despite the evidence against him, he held himself with an air of arrogance, as if he still believed he had a trump card up his sleeve. His lawyer, a man known for his ability to manipulate details and play with perceptions, began his defense with a calculated strategy to attack the integrity of the testimonies and question the impartiality of the board of directors, and Leonard in particular. "Mr. Sanders," the lawyer said, standing up with a smile that seemed razor-sharp, "during your leadership, is it true that you started a relationship with an employee of the company, one who is now pregnant with twins?" The question resonated in the room, drawing murmurs from the audience and inquisitive glances. Leonard, who had already anticipated this tactic, maintained his composure and responded clearly. "It's true that I developed a personal relationship with Jenna Brown, who has proven to be one of the most honorable and courageous people I know. However, that relationship never compromised the ethics or operations of the company. No funds were diverted, Nor were decisions made outside of established procedures, he said without blinking. John's lawyer seized the moment to ask more loaded questions, trying to plant doubts in the jury's mind. But each insinuation was met with documented evidence and testimonies that backed Leonard's integrity and Jenna's innocence. Anna, as a key witness, presented a detailed account of how she had uncovered John's irregularities and how he had tried to sabotage his opponents, including leaking personal documents to attack Jenna. The trial proceeded at a tense pace, with each testimony and document adding to a story of betrayal and corruption on John's part. The murmurs in the room began to change tone, and the jurors' faces grew more serious, absorbing every piece of evidence presented by the prosecution and Anna. The case against John was strengthening, and his lawyer, though cunning, was running out of options. From her apartment, Jenna watched everything unfold with a mixture of fear and hope. Oliver, who had been softly playing his flute as an attempt to calm his nerves, approached her and hugged her, as if he knew that this simple gesture could give her the strength she needed. The sound of the courtroom echoed on the TV, and Jenna closed her eyes, hoping that the hours until the verdict would pass quickly. When the defense's turn came, John, in a desperate move, asked to make a statement. The judge, after a brief and cautious pause, allowed him. John stood, and although his eyes betrayed a gleam of defiance, his posture was that of a man who had lost almost everything. "I can admit my mistakes, but not everything that has been said here is the truth. There are many more layers to this story, and I'm just a pawn in a much bigger game," he said, dropping his words with the intention of sowing doubt and confusion in the room. The murmurs resurfaced, and the judge struck his gavel to restore order. Leonard watched John with a mixture of compassion and disdain. He knew that the man wouldn't easily admit his defeat and that he would try to drag others down with him. But at that moment, it was clear that the evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for hours that felt eternal. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, and outside, the journalists and curious onlookers eagerly awaited the verdict. Finally, the jury returned, and the room fell silent when the spokesperson stood. In the case of the state versus John Ortega, we find the defendant guilty of charges of embezzlement, blackmail, coercion, and threats, he announced, and the ensuing murmur was one of astonishment and relief. Leonard closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself a deep breath. Anna smiled faintly and looked at Leonard, knowing they had overcome one of the biggest obstacles in their lives. Jenna, in her apartment, felt the tension slip from her body as tears rolled down her cheeks. Oliver, seeing her emotional, smiled and hugged her, not fully understanding what had happened, but knowing that everything would be okay. The judge ordered John's sentence, and he would be taken to prison for a long time. The expression on his face at last was that of a defeated man. The shadow he had cast over the company, over Leonard, and over Jenna began to dissipate. The truth had triumphed, and justice had prevailed. That night, the Sanders Tower lit up like a beacon of renewal. The employees, relieved and encouraged by the outcome, began to regain trust in the company and in its leadership. Leonard, after saying goodbye to Anna and the lawyers, went straight to Jenna's apartment. When he entered, he saw her standing in the living room, with Oliver beside her, and a smile on her face that made him stop for a moment, simply to absorb the scene. "We did it," Leonard said, walking toward her and hugging her with all the emotion accumulated over the weeks. "Yes, we did," Jenna replied, hugging him back as she felt the twins' heartbeat in her belly, as if they too were celebrating the victory. The sound of Oliver's flute, playing a joyful and spontaneous melody, filled the room. The music, which had long been a reminder of hope and struggle, now became a symbol of the life they could finally begin to build without fear. They had weathered the storm, and although they knew that life would continue to present challenges, facing them together was their greatest strength. John Ortega's trial marked a turning point in the lives of all involved. With his conviction and the revelation of his actions, the shadow that had threatened to tear apart the Sanders Corporation and Jenna's life dissipated, making room for light and hope to take its place. The days following the verdict were a whirlwind of emotions, with congratulations and gestures of support coming from both inside and outside the company. But what mattered most to Leonard and Jenna was that for the first time in months, they could plan their future without the weight of uncertainty. At the Sanders Tower, the atmosphere had changed. Employees walked with more confidence, and the mood was one of renewal and optimism. Anna, who had become a cornerstone in the fight for justice, was publicly recognized in a special ceremony. Leonard officially appointed her director of the Ethics and Transparency Committee, ensuring that the lessons learned would not be forgotten and that integrity would remain the company's cornerstone. Although grateful for the recognition he had received for his leadership, Leonard was ready to focus on what truly mattered: his family. On the afternoon of the ceremony, he went to Jenna's apartment with a smile that reflected both relief and love. Upon arriving, Oliver ran to greet him with the flute in hand, and Leonard picked him up in a hug that made the boy laugh. "Look, Leonard, I've been practicing that melody you like," Oliver said, playing a note with pride. Leonard laughed and stroked his hair before turning his attention to Jenna, who was watching them with a warm smile and her hands resting on her belly, where the twins were moving energetically. The sight of Jenna, radiant and full of life, made him feel a lump in his throat. The struggle had been tough, but it had been worth it. "How do you feel?" Leonard asked, moving closer and gently placing a hand on her belly, feeling the baby's response with a soft movement. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Jenna replied, looking him in the eye, knowing that words couldn't capture everything she felt. The arrival of the twins became the focus of attention and preparations. Leonard and Jenna dedicated themselves to turning their home into a place where the new family could grow and thrive. The laughter and sounds of Oliver's small hands playing filled the apartment, and time passed quickly as they made sure everything was ready for the big day. The moment finally arrived one spring night when Jenna felt the first signs that the twins were ready to be born. Leonard, prepared and calm, took her to the hospital, where Anna and some close friends were waiting to offer support. The hours that followed were intense, but by dawn, the news of Mia and Gabriel's arrival filled the waiting room with smiles and tears of joy. Leonard entered Jenna's room, his eyes shining with emotion as he saw her holding the twins. Mia, with dark hair that reminded him of her mother, slept peacefully, while Gabriel waved his tiny arms as if he were already ready to explore the world. The love he felt in that moment overwhelmed him, and he couldn't hold back the tears that ran down his cheeks. "They're perfect," Leonard whispered, leaning down to kiss Jenna and gently caressing the tiny heads of the newborns. "Yes, they are," Jenna replied, with a smile that spoke of all the sacrifices and joys that had brought them to this moment. The following time was a whirlwind of new experiences and adjustments. Mia and Gabriel brought a renewed sense of purpose and love that filled every corner of the home. Oliver, who had eagerly awaited the arrival of his siblings, became their little guardian, playing his flute with soft melodies to calm them and making the house resonate with music and laughter. The company, under Leonard's leadership and Anna's influence, experienced a rebirth. The policies implemented and the shift toward more humane and transparent leadership not only regained the trust of the partners and employees, but also attracted new talent and opportunities. The Sanders Tower, once a symbol of power and ambition, became a reflection of resilience and renewal. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the city in a golden light, Leonard, Jenna, Oliver and the twins enjoyed a picnic in the park. Oliver ran after a ball, while Mia and Gabriel, just a few months old, looked around with curious eyes from their portable cribs. Jenna, sitting on a blanket next to Leonard, looked at him and knew that, despite everything they had faced, they were where they were meant to be. "We've come a long way," she said, resting her head on Leonard's shoulder. "And every step has been worth it," he replied, wrapping his arm around her and feeling the warmth of their family around them. The sound of Oliver's flute, which he had decided to play for his little siblings, mixed with the bird's song and the murmur of the wind. The music, which had always been a symbol of hope, was now also a symbol of the life they had built together. A life full of challenges, but also of love, overcoming, and new beginnings. The sun set slowly, and as night began to fall, Leonard and Jenna looked at each other, sharing a smile that needed no words. Because they knew that, no matter what the future would bring, they would always have each other, Oliver, and their two little miracles to face it. And that certainty was more than enough. The final chapter of their struggle closed, not with a perfect ending, but with a real one, where love and family triumphed over adversity, promising a tomorrow full of light and possibilities. Thank you for joining us in this incredible story of perseverance, love, and hope. If you enjoyed our journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more content filled with emotions and new stories. See you in the next chapter of life, where there's always more to discover. See you soon.